Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have an important healthcare update, how do vaccines work, and why it is important to get vaccinated. But we also have a couple of the state's leading reporters, and we'll do the big stories of the week. As they say, let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we don't have to worry about finding out the big stories of the week. I hope you had a great 4th of July. Actually, we're still in that long weekend, am I right? Marc Levy is sitting across from me. He's, of course, with the Associated Press, and Angela Couloumbis with the Philadelphia Inquirer. All right, let's start out, first of all. The budget was done on time. $34 billion, lots more money for education. But, man, it got complicated with a whole variety of things. Marc, I'll start with you. Give me a quick overview about what still remains to be done. I mean, we talked about earlier what got done, but man, there's a ton of things that still remain unresolved. Take one.
Yeah, so the governor had a bunch of priorities that went out with his budget proposal at the beginning of the year. One of them is raising the minimum wage.
Right.
He said, it's time for people to earn a living that keeps them out of poverty, and it would be good for the state's finances. His point that the state would get more revenue, it would lift more people off of benefits, but it got some discussion in June. But Pennsylvania is still among a minority of states that are still at the $7.25 federal minimum.
Yeah, and he wanted $12 an hour going to 15. And Senator Corman, the majority leader, we've talked about this before, said, let's talk, let's talk, let's talk. I thought they might do $9.50 or $10 an hour or something like that, and just didn't materialize.
No, I think there were enough Republicans, particularly in the House, who have real problems with it, and they have talked a lot about the impact on small businesses, and it just wasn't going to, it had marinated for too long, but not long enough,
I like that,
apparently.
marinated. Yeah. That's a great, all right, you pick one.
Okay.
Give me a topic.
Something else that didn't get done was, yet again, for the 5th year in a row, a new tax on natural gas drilling, which this year the governor had tied to a very big, ambitious infrastructure improvement program. That didn't happen. Also, what didn't happen was a user fee of sorts on municipalities that have either shuttered or don't have their own local police departments and rely on the state police for coverage. Yeah,
that's been a pretty big issue because there are a fair number of large rural, not necessarily population, geographic, the police have to come in and the state police do their coverage, and they argue they don't have the resources to do it. There ought to be some way, but they still can't work that out.
Yeah, and I mean, what's driving this is the state police budget is growing quickly, and in recent years the legislature has fed that by using highway construction money. And if you recall, there was a big tax increase on gas and other motorist fees in 2013 to flush money into highway construction, and when people find out that hundreds and hundreds of millions of it are going to the state police budget, so there's an issue there. The highway construction companies want to see that money go to highway construction, and the state's hasn't worked out a fix yet.
And the Turnpike has a huge debt because some of its money gets diverted to PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, for construction projects. And it seems like the legislature passes a law. One thing is supposed to happen, and
yeah, I do think, though, that is going to be an issue that perhaps will come up in the fall. There have been enough people yelling and screaming about how it needs to be tackled. So I expect to hear some of that when the legislature returns after its summer break.
Yeah.
I did want to say one other thing that is important that did happen in this budget is there is approval now to lower the mandatory age for children to attend school from 8 to 6. And on the opposite end, they have to stay in until 18.
18, yeah.
So that was something that definitely will have an impact on a lot of parents out there.
Yeah. All right, let's run to a break. When we come back, Marc will start, and we'll continue to get into these subjects. Some of them we thought might get done in the normal budget process, which is now over, and the legislature won't come back until September, I take it. So there's some time, and there'll be some committee meetings and other things that go on during the summer, but there's still a lot of important items on the agenda. We'll pick up a couple of them after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
I'm talking with Angela Couloumbis from the Philadelphia Inquirer and Marc Levy with the Associated Press. We're doing sort of the big stories of the week, but in reality, we're picking up the threads from the recently enacted state budget. A good many things did not take place, as the governor and even some Republicans in the legislature would like to happen. So I'm going to turn to Marc Levy. All right, there was a big health care change that has to do with how you access health care. Take it.
So it's important because there's 400,000 people in Pennsylvania who buy their health insurance through healthcare.gov, which was created under the Affordable Care Act. Pennsylvania, starting in the fall of 2020, will start enrolling people into its own healthcare or health insurance online exchange. The important thing here is that the state believes it can save 5 to 10% off premiums for everyone who's buying through that. They can market it better, they can get more people into it, and essentially save people money.
And that's a done deal now.
The legislature unanimously passed a bill giving the administration authority. Did you
use the word I thought you used? What was that word?
Unanimously.
And you don't have that happen very often, do you?
No, because this is essentially Obamacare.
So it has to be a good thing if they did it unanimously.
The administration sold it by saying we can lower people's premiums.
Oh my! All right, there's a program I want to let you explain it called the Cash Assistance Program or the General Assistance Program. It also created a little bit. My favorite word out of all your reporting was chaos.
Chaos.
Talk about the program. Talk about the program.
So the program has had a fairly complicated history, but fundamentally it gives cash assistance to the poorest of Pennsylvanians. Many of them are disabled. It's about $200 a month. A lot of these people use it for items like shampoo and deodorant or some bus fare and things like that. Fast forward to the budget. It became a political hot potato. Republicans wanted to eliminate it. The governor and Democrats wanted to keep it. And they were starting to debate this issue on the Senate floor, and lo and behold, it turned into a shouting match. Yeah. Because Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who presides over the Senate and who is a Democrat, was not recognizing the Republican Majority Leader, Jake Corman, who was trying to stop a Democratic Senator, Katie Muth, from reading a letter from a homeless man who relied on the program. And it made national headlines, and people were tweeting about it on social media.
And they were screaming and shouting. Yeah. I mean, there have been fistfights on the floor of the General Assembly. So when this occurred, I said, this is not as bad as it used to be. Right. My other question, Mark, who would fool with John Fetterman? The dude is 6'9" and he lost some weight. I don't know that I would want to get into a shouting match with John Fetterman.
We know he played high school football, but he seems more gentle giant than back alley ruffian.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's something else that I think we ought to talk about. We're now getting into into the elections for next year. In the 10th Congressional District, Eugene DePasquale, the Auditor General, has said he's going to take on Representative Perry. Mm-hmm. That's going to be, I think, a nationally watched contest. Perry only won re-election by 3 points. And we're going to talk over the course of this of the next year, a lot about big elections, but that certainly is one. Take it.
Sure. So Eugene DePasquale, he's won statewide twice for Auditor General. Now, that doesn't mean he necessarily won the counties of York and Cumberland and Dauphin County every election, and those are the counties that make up the 10th Congressional District. Now, this district is much more competitive for Democrats after it was redrawn last year by the state Supreme Court, and Scott Perry is one of the U.S. House's most conservative members.
Big Trump supporter, right?
He's a Trump supporter. I think there's some things that Trump does he doesn't necessarily agree with, but he is conservative, and he is clearly the state's most conservative member in Congress.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to venture into this. When we talked earlier, I didn't think I would, but the whole question about election law changes. We don't know what the governor's going to do as we tape this program, but there is a sense among some, I think more Republicans than Democrats, you'll correct me if I'm wrong about this, that end straight party voting. Check a box, you vote for a ticket.
Yeah, it's in a bill that's now before the governor. It's also in that bill is something the governor really, really wants, and that's funding for the counties for new voting machines. So it's going to be a tough choice for the governor. And I want to just note that this tactic of Republicans adding things into bills that also have things the governor wants has been the story of sort of the untold story of budget negotiations this year. So,
but there's some sense. I mean, there's some other changes in election laws that the legislature has considered, and we'll have to see. Not just you can't. You have to go and vote for each office, no straight party voting. The other is unaffiliated voters, or about 800,000 of them. Should they be able to vote in a primary?
Yeah, that's a separate bill. That's not in this bill, but that did pass the Senate. It's sponsored by the top Republican in the Senate, Joe Scarnati. And there's some thinking that it would help moderate primaries if you have more moderate independent voters, but the political science behind it that I've seen doesn't really bear that out.
I think you're right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. All right, guess what? We have an important healthcare update. We're going to talk about vaccines, vaccinations. How important is it? Stay with us.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Dr. Danae Powers joins me. She's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. And boy, do we have a topic that has generated some controversy, and that has to do with vaccines, why it's important to get them. And there's concern. Tell me if I'm wrong, doctor, but it seems like there's been a decrease in the number of people who get vaccinations. At least that's what I've read. And they have these concerns that in many ways aren't warranted anymore. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, we think you're right. I mean, the physicians of the Pennsylvania Medical Society have debated this issue and discussed it for a number of years now. And yes, again, it's heating up. And there are individuals out there who feel that they don't want to have, particularly their children, vaccinated. That movement seems to have been growing recently, and it is leading to more and more individuals saying, I don't want to have my child vaccinated, and it puts us at risk.
But let's talk about what generally do people get vaccinated for, or how, rephrase that, should they get vaccinated for?
Well, there's a schedule of recommended vaccinations starting when children are infants. So we have the hepatitis vaccines, the measles, mumps, rubella, the meningitis vaccines, the varicella vaccines. We now have vaccines out for older individuals, the HPV, which are the some of the sexually transmitted viruses. There's a whole host of vaccines. Should you travel or live in certain parts of the country, there's additional vaccines. So there's an entire schedule that is available, and all pediatricians' office would have it.
Now, the big question is that, and some people talk about this, and I'm glad you're here, you're the expert, about potential side effects. Now, there are obviously some side effects, right?
There's side effects to everything.
Yeah,
true, you put a Band-Aid on, you take it off, there's a side effect. You feel it coming off, yeah. There's side effects to everything. The issue that we look at as physicians is what we call the risk-benefit ratio. So what is the risk of the side effect compared to the benefit that the patient is going to receive? And in the case of vaccines, they're one of the safest medical interventions we can do for long-term health of not only the individual but the community.
Yeah. And I guess there's this, now every day I'm reading the paper about this increase in the number of people with measles. I don't know if you see that.
Oh, absolutely. How can we not see it? Measles, as well as a lot of other diseases that we had hoped were gone.
Gone, yeah.
So what happens is you have a person who isn't vaccinated who gets exposed, so that's an index case. That individual comes into a community. If everybody in that community or enough people in that community are already vaccinated, the disease stops. It doesn't spread.
But there's a
But you have you have people who aren't vaccinated, and at a certain level, they then act as carriers to continue to spread the disease. And here's where the tragedies come in. These diseases were not mild and benign. We didn't develop vaccines for diseases that people, it's no big deal if you get it, you have a bad day and you're over it. These diseases, and people have forgotten this, they led to serious complications, including death, which was why there was a push to find vaccines for them in the first place. And we still, unfortunately, have individuals in the community that are not healthy enough to be vaccinated. There are individuals who have underlying diseases or illnesses, such as immunocompromised individuals or certain types of cancer. They can't get a vaccine. That person needs to be protected from the virus or the illness spreading throughout a community.
And some of these illnesses that you could get are life-threatening, or am I wrong about that?
No, they are life-threatening. People used to die from them. That's, again, what I say. We, as a culture and a society, have kind of forgotten what used to happen before these diseases
What role
were
does the
treatable.
state legislature play in this?
Well, they have the role in the sense that they can pass laws, either mandating, not mandating the use of these vaccinations. And right now there's some debate going on. There's some competing legislation coming out that is, individuals saying everyone has to be vaccinated, and some legislation saying, no, we want to give people the right not to be vaccinated. There's a bill out there saying that trying to mandate what doctors have to accept in their practices. I could go into detail if you want me to, but there's a lot of legislation that's percolating out there in regards to this.
All right, we got to run to a break. Maybe we'll come back to that, but what I do want to get into the role that nurse practitioners play. When we go to see a physician, you often see a nurse practitioner, so it's not, and doctors can have probably far more patients than they can quite deal with at any given time. We're going to talk about the role of nurse practitioners and what's going to happen there, and we'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
I'm chatting with Dr. Powers. She's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. We talked about, I think, a very important subject, vaccinations, and why it's important to get vaccinated. You may have different views out there. That's fine. Send me a text or an email, and we'll try to get the answers for you. But there's another issue, and that has to do with the role that nurse practitioners play. All right, doctor, when I go now, I often see, when I go personally, and I don't want to get too personal here, but, a nurse practitioner, you'll deal with. And there are some legitimate things that nurse practitioners can do, but what's the problem? What's an issue here?
There's an issue. The issue is this. The physician's practice and the medical society, our position is that we want what we call team-based care. In other words, a range of individuals available to care for a patient. But in every team, there's always a physician available. And we feel that it's important that every patient have access to the most experienced, knowledgeable training base that currently exists.
Right.
And so in team-based care, the physician would be collaborating with a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, nurses, techs, aides, and they all have something in the spectrum of care that they do. But the doctors of the Medical Society, and they've been very clear on this over the years, feel that every practitioner who is not a physician should have access to a physician in some kind of an arrangement, collaborative agreement, that patient can then, that if there's something unique or different or special or complicated, a physician is available to get involved.
So your point is the nurse practitioner has to have a relationship with a physician so that they can interact together to adequately treat a patient. Is that your big point?
Absolutely. That's our big point. We feel that there's no such thing as a patient that is so guaranteed to be not complex that a doctor doesn't need to be available for questioning or input.
Well, one of the questions has to, look, we live in a big state. It's you know, large, I'll say largely rural, but there's significant rural aspects to it. And is there a shortage of physicians in some areas? Is that another problem that affects this relationship?
Correct. There is a shortage of physicians, but I will say two things. The data from states that have done away with the collaborative agreement is that doesn't ameliorate the shortage. The nurse practitioners are going in the urban areas rather than the rural areas. So that's the data that exists. The second thing is, and I practice rurally, and technically I'm a rural patient, I push back against this concept that because you're rural, you don't have access to the same quality of care. There are things we could do to expand access for rural patients that would maintain quality of care. For instance, telemedicine. There's a very robust movement now to get telemedicine out. And if that were to beef up, it would take care of a lot of the issues with rural practice. Yeah. We would like to see liability reform so that people could volunteer to go into clinics. We would like to see support for residency training slots expand because a lot of the residents would like to practice in a rural area.
Yeah,
we need to get expansion for that. So there's a lot of solutions that would not say there's some patients that are going to get access to
But the point I want to make is this issue is very significant for the health care that patients receive.
Absolutely. Look, every patient deserves the access to the best expert they can get. And to say that there's some situations where that doesn't apply in terms of having access, the Medical Society's against that.
And there's legislation in the Senate right now that would do what?
Well, it passed the Senate. It would do away with the requirement for supervision in the form of a collaborative agreement. So right now, CRNPs can functionally practice diagnosing, treating, ordering tests, but the requirement is that they have an agreement with a physician that's available for questioning or oversight. The legislation that passed the Senate says we want to take the requirement for that collaborative agreement away.
And you want the collaborative.
And we feel the collaborative agreement is important.
It just makes sense to me to have a collaborative agreement.
Care.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to let somebody be out there without working closely with a doctor, right?
Or having that's our position, and we feel that it's based on science, it's based on training, it's based on understanding of what is important for patient care.
All right, I want to thank you for coming in. This
has
been a great update, very helpful, particularly the vaccination part of it.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you stay well.